June Halloran buried her father on a Tuesday and lost his diner on a Wednesday. She was still in funeral black when the lawyer opened the folder. Still smelled of lilies. She stood at the counter she had learned to walk behind as a girl, and she heard the words that took it from her. The diner was hers, only if she married by spring. Otherwise, it sold. She did not sit down. Her Aunt Lorraine already had a buyer. That was the part that turned June's stomach cold. Before the ground over Walt was even settled, a man in a gray suit walked into the breakfast rush and slid a check across the counter where 40 regulars were eating their eggs. $410,000. Preston Doyle smiled the whole time. "Sentiment doesn't service debt, Ms. Halloran," he said, and the coffee cups went quiet. But the will had a catch inside the catch. The marriage had to be real. A true marriage, or the whole thing collapsed. And there was only one man in all of Rensselaer who could read her father's handwriting. One man who knew the secret folded into a grease-stained recipe card. The gruff-line cook June had sworn, years ago, she would never speak to again. She never thought she'd have to say his name. If you believe love is built with two pairs of hands, this story is for you. So do this before we go on. Hit that subscribe button, because these stories only find you if you do. And in the comments, tell me the town your family's diner was in. The place everybody knew you by name. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Rensselaer, Ohio was the kind of town the interstate forgot. It sat off the old state route, a main street of brick storefronts that used to hum and now mostly waited. Half the windows wore paper signs. For lease. For sale. Coming soon, though nothing ever came. The steel that built the place had gone somewhere cheaper decades back, and the town had learned to live smaller, quieter, but it had not learned to die. Not yet. And on the corner of Main and 3rd stood the one light that never went out. Walt's Corner Diner. The neon sign over the door was a little sparrow, wings up, mid-flight, buzzing pink and gold against the gray. Walt had put it up himself the year June was born. He said a sparrow was a plain bird that sang anyway. He liked that. The town liked it too. On a bad night, folks would drive past just to see it lit. Inside, the diner was the town's living room. Not a restaurant, a living room that happened to sell pie. There was the long counter with its row of chrome stools, worn silver where 1,000 elbows had rested. There was the corner booth by the window, the one Walt kept for the old-timers, where the same 4 men had argued about the same 4 things for 30 years. There was the pie case up front, glass fogged soft, turning slow. Buttermilk, apple, coconut cream on Fridays. The formica was the color of butter, and the whole place smelled like coffee and bacon and something warm underneath that you couldn't name but never forgot. June had grown up in that smell. She'd done her homework in the corner booth. She'd learned to count making change at the register, standing on a milk crate to reach it. She'd learned to walk behind that counter before she could read, one small hand on the cold steel edge, following her father's boots. And she had left it. That was the thing that sat on her now, heavier than the black dress. 12 years back, she'd fought with Walt about the menu. She wanted to fix it, modernize it, bring it into the world she was learning in culinary school. He wanted it left alone. The fight got loud. It got mean. She packed a bag and took a bus to Chicago and swore she'd make her own name in somebody else's kitchen. She sent postcards. She called on his birthday. But she never came home. Not once. Not until the phone rang 3 weeks ago and a nurse said the word heart, and by the time June's plane landed, her father was already gone. Now she slept in the little apartment above the diner. Walt's apartment. His flannel shirt still hung on the door hook, and she couldn't make herself move it. The rent on her Chicago place was still running, but there was nothing to go back to there. The kitchen job that was supposed to make her name had stalled 2 years ago, and she was tired of pretending it hadn't. So she stayed. She cooked the funeral casseroles the neighbors kept bringing until she couldn't look at another one. And quietly, Without telling anyone, she paid for the burial out of the small savings she had left. The plot, the stone, the lilies she now couldn't smell without her throat closing. She did all of it alone. That was how June did things. Downstairs, the diner ran on habit and one silent man. Cole Rusk had cooked Walt's line for 9 years. He came in before dawn, and he left after dark, and in between he barely said a word that wasn't an order fired back at the pass. He was 36, built solid, with forearms that told you everything his mouth wouldn't. Old burned scars, faded and pale. A crooked finger that had set wrong years ago. Hands that had been in a hot kitchen since he was a kid. He wore Walt's spare apron because he'd never bought his own, and he tied it the way Walt tied it, double knotted at the front. He had not said one word to June about her father. Not one. No condolence. No I'm sorry. Nothing. The morning she came back, he'd looked up from the grill, met her eyes for a second, and gone back to the eggs. She hated him a little for that. She'd braced herself for pity from the whole town, and got it in buckets. And here was the one man who worked in her father's kitchen, and he couldn't manage 2 words. But on her 3rd morning home, she came down before the sun, unable to sleep, and sat at the end of the counter, with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. She'd been staring at nothing for an hour, and without a word, without looking at her really, Cole reached over, took the cold cup, dumped it, and set a fresh hot one in front of her. Then, he went back to prepping the line. She didn't thank him. She was too surprised. And he wouldn't have wanted her to. That was Cole. He said what he meant with his hands and nothing else. June didn't understand it, and she told herself she didn't want to. The lawyer came Wednesday morning, before opening. His name was Feeney, and he'd done Walt's papers for 30 years, and he looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He laid the folder on the counter and asked June to sit. Aunt Lorraine was already there, perched on a stool in a camel coat that had never once seen a friar, her lipstick perfect at 8 in the morning. Lorraine was Walt's younger sister. She'd married a man with money over in Columbus and spent 40 years making sure everyone knew it. She looked at the diner the way you'd look at a lot with a building on it. Square footage. Nothing more. Walt's wishes were specific, Feeney said. He didn't like it. You could see he didn't like it. The diner, the building, and the business go to June. In full. June let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. On a condition. The breath stopped. Feeney read it plainly, because there was no soft way. The diner passed to June only if she was married, not engaged. Married, and in a bona fide marriage within 12 months of Walt's death. If that condition was not met, the building would be sold to satisfy the debt against it. And there was a debt. A balloon payment on the mortgage Walt had refinanced years back to keep the place afloat through the lean years. $137,000. Due in the fall. June heard the number and felt the floor tilt. Married, she said. He wanted me married. That's what it says. To who? That he left to you. Lorraine set down her coffee like she'd been waiting for exactly this. It's a mercy, really, she said in that voice. The one that made everything sound like a favor she was doing you. You can't run this place, June. You've been gone 12 years. And that payment comes due whether you like it or not. She opened her own leather bag, the expensive kind, and drew out a single folded paper, which is why I've already got us an offer. A very generous one. Us. I'm co-executor, dear. Walt named me too. Lorraine slid the paper across the butter-colored Formica. Kessler Vein Holdings. They develop the corner lots. They want this one for a drive-through pad. $410,000. June, cash, that clears the debt, splits the rest, and you walk away with more money than your father saw in his life. She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. You could go back to Chicago. Start fresh. June looked at the paper. She didn't touch it. Behind her, at the grill, the scrape of the spatula stopped for just a second, then started again. She didn't take the offer. Of course she didn't. She folded it, slid it back, and told Lorraine she'd think about the will and nothing else. Lorraine buttoned her coat, said something about being sensible, and left in a cloud of perfume. Feeney lingered a moment, told June quietly that the marriage clause was real, that Walt had been very clear it had to be a true marriage and not a paper one, and that he was sorry. Then he left too. June sat alone at the counter with a cold cup of coffee and a debt with her father's name on it. She learned about the paychecks by accident. The regulars came in like the tide, whether the world was ending or not. That afternoon, the corner booth filled up with the old-timers, and June was refilling their cups, half listening, because there was comfort in their arguing. Earl was going on about the mill. Somebody's grandson. The usual. And then old Dell, who'd been eating breakfast at that counter since before June was born, tipped his head toward the kitchen and said it, plain as weather, the way old men say the biggest things. Cole's been putting his own paychecks back into this dump for 2 years now. Won't say why. Man's a fool. Dell sipped his coffee. Good fool, but a fool. June's hand stopped on the pot. Nobody else at the booth even looked up. Earl was already on to the next thing. Dell said it and let it go, like a stone dropped in deep water, and the ripples closed over it, and the conversation moved on. June looked toward the kitchen. Cole was at the pass, plating a club, head down, face closed as a door. Whatever he'd heard, if he'd heard, it didn't show. She thought about asking him. She didn't. She told herself it was gossip. Old men embroider things. It couldn't mean anything. She filed it away and forgot it, which was exactly what a planted thing is supposed to do. Because the truth was, she and Cole could barely stand in the same kitchen. It started the first full day she took the line. She'd worked good kitchens in Chicago, real ones. And she came down that morning with ideas. She wanted to change the breakfast menu, add an avocado plate, do a proper hollandaise instead of the packet stuff, put a real espresso machine where the old drip pot sat. She stood at the pass with a notepad, full of plans, and told Cole how it was going to be. Cole listened. Then he said, "No, just that." He didn't even stop working. "Excuse me? Walt's menu. Not yours. Walt's dead." It came out harder than she meant. "And this is my diner now. Or it will be." He looked at her then, really looked, and there was something in his face she couldn't name and didn't like. "You've been gone 12 years, he said. "You don't know what these people eat. You don't know why." And he went back to the eggs. She wanted to throw the notepad at his head. The second fight was worse. 2 days later, she pulled the buttermilk pie off the case and tried to remake it lighter, less sugar, a modern crust. She was proud of it. She set a slice in front of Dell, the old man, as a test and watched his face fall. "That's not Walt's pie," Dell said, gentle, which was worse than if he'd been cruel. "I don't know what that is, honey, but it's not the pie." Cole didn't say a word. He just cleared the plate, scraped it into the bin, and set the old recipe back in its spot on the shelf like she'd never touched it. That silence was louder than any argument. It said, plain as anything, "You don't belong in this kitchen." And it landed exactly where it hurt, because some small, scared part of June was afraid he was right. The third time, she snapped. She came down and found he'd changed the prep list back to Walt's after she'd rewritten it. And she said things. That he was stubborn. That he was living in a dead man's kitchen. That maybe he cared more about a menu than about the fact that the whole place was about to be sold out from under both of them. He took it. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. When she was done, breathing hard, he wiped his hands on his apron and said, "Lo, you want to save it. So do I. That's the only thing we've got in common." And he walked into the walk-in and shut the door and left her standing there, feeling like the smallest person in Ohio. She couldn't stand him. She was sure of it. And then Preston Doyle came for breakfast. It was a Friday, and the place was full. That was the cruelty of it. The timing. 40 regulars, every stool taken, the corner booth loud, the griddle roaring, June running plates, because they were short a server. The whole warm machine of the place was humming along, and for 1 hour, she'd almost forgotten the will, forgotten the number, forgotten everything but the rhythm of a full house. The bell over the door rang, and Preston Doyle walked in. You knew he didn't belong the second you saw him. Gray suit with no wrinkle in it. Shoes that had never touched a gravel lot. He moved through the diner like a man walking through a place he'd already bought, and he came straight to the counter and set down a slim leather folder and smiled at June like they were old friends. Miss Halloran, Preston Doyle. Kessler Vane. He said the company name like it should mean something warm. Your aunt speaks very highly of you. We're a little busy, June said. I can see that. He looked around at the full house, and his smile widened, and somehow that was the worst part. It's a wonderful crowd. Truly, there's real feeling in this room. He opened the folder. Inside was a check. He turned it so she could read the number, and he slid it across the butter formica, right past the sugar caddy, right into the middle of 40 people's breakfast. But feeling isn't a business plan. That payment comes due in the fall, and the bank won't take feeling. I'd like to solve everyone's problem this morning. The counter had gone quiet. Not all at once. Stool by stool, the regulars stopped talking and turned. Dell set down his fork. Earl, the whole room felt the temperature change. Aunt Lorraine was there too, June realized, at the far end of the counter in her camel coat, and she spoke up so the whole room could hear. It's the right thing, June. It's the sensible thing. Everyone can see that. June looked at the check. $410,000, made out and waiting. She looked at Doyle's smooth, patient face. No, she said. Doyle sighed like a man disappointed in a child. And then he leaned in, and he lowered his voice just enough that it carried anyway. Because he wanted it to, and he delivered the line June would hear in her sleep for weeks. Sentiment doesn't service debt, Miss Halloran. He tapped the check once sign, and I'll let you keep the neon sign as a souvenir. Something to remember it by. The souvenir. The sparrow. Her father's sparrow that he'd hung the year she was born, reduced to a keepsake for the woman who lost the building. June's hands were shaking. She wanted to be furious, and instead she just felt small and young, and 40 pairs of eyes were on her, and she had no move to make. She'd left her father's kitchen 12 years ago swearing she'd come back somebody. And here she was, in his apron, being offered his sparrow as a party favor. Get out of my father's diner, she said. Her voice barely worked. Doyle straightened, unbothered, and gathered his folder. He left the check. I'll leave this with you, he said, in case sentiment wears off. And he walked out, and the bell rang, and the sparrow buzzed over the door as it closed behind him. The whole room let out its breath at once. But it wasn't over. That was the thing about that day. It kept taking. That same afternoon, June drove out to the bank on the highway with her father's books and a loan application she'd stayed up 2 nights building. She'd done the math a dozen ways. If she could just refinance the balloon, buy herself 2 years, she could turn the diner around. She knew she could. She'd built the numbers to prove it. The loan officer who came to the little glass office was Grant Weller. Of course it was Grant. Rensselaer was that small. Grant had been her high school boyfriend, the safe one, the one her father had liked, the one she'd left along with everything else when she took the bus to Chicago. He'd stayed. He'd gotten the steady job and the good haircut and the regional title. And he stood up when she came in and said her name soft like it still meant something to him. He was kind about it. That was almost worse. He looked at her numbers, and he nodded in the right places, and then he set the folder down and gave her the no. Her credit was thin from the Chicago years. The diner already carried the lien. On paper, he said. On paper, it just didn't work. He was sorry. He looked like he was sorry. And then, walking her out, at the door, he lowered his voice the way Doyle had, except gentle, except it made her skin crawl in a different way, and he said, "Off the record, June, there might be other ways I could help you." Quietly, outside the bank. He paused. "I always thought we left some things unfinished. I've done well for myself. A person in your spot, she needs someone steady. That's all I'm saying." June got in her car before she said something she'd regret. She sat in the bank parking lot with her father's books on the passenger seat and the check from Doyle still in her apron pocket, and for the first time since the funeral, she cried. Not soft. The ugly kind. Because the clock was real now. She could feel it. 12 months, minus the weeks already gone, and $137,000, and a menu she couldn't change, and a cook who wouldn't let her, and a whole town watching to see if Walt's girl would keep his light on, or let it go dark. She drove home. She didn't know it yet, but the answer was already in the building. She just couldn't stand the sight of him. She learned the freezer had died at 2 in the morning. June couldn't sleep, hadn't slept right since she came home, and she was lying awake in her father's bed listening to the old building tick when she heard a sound from downstairs. Metal on metal. Careful, somebody in the kitchen. Her first thought was Doyle. Her second was worse. She pulled on jeans and crept down the back stairs with her phone in her hand like a weapon. The kitchen was dim, one work light burning over the line. The walk-in freezer door stood open, breathing white fog into the warm room. And there, half inside it, sleeves shoved up, was Cole. The compressor unit was pulled apart on the floor. His toolbox was open. His hands, those scarred, careful hands, were black with grease and cold to look at, and he was working a part loose with a wrench jaw set, not a sound out of him. The freezer had failed. She understood it all at once. It had failed sometime that night, and the weekend orders were in there, hundreds of dollars of meat and dairy the diner could not afford to lose. Not now. Not with the number hanging over them. And Cole had gotten a call, or checked it out of habit, or just known the way he knew everything, and instead of waking her, instead of letting it spoil, he had come in at 2 in the morning to fix it himself. For a diner that wasn't his. On a night nobody would ever thank him for. He heard her on the stairs and looked up. His face was tired in a way she'd never seen it. He didn't explain. Of course he didn't. He just said, "Compressor's shot a valve. I can get it running till morning. Then we replace it." And he turned back to the cold. June stood in the doorway a long moment. "You could have woken me. No reason to. Nothing you could do." It should have made her angry. That the old dismissal. "You don't belong in this kitchen." But standing there at 2 in the morning, watching a man ruin his hands in the cold to save food that wasn't his, she couldn't find the anger. Something in her chest cracked. Just a hairline. Just the first crack. She didn't go back to bed. She got a second work light. She held it for him, steady, for 2 hours so he could see the valve. And neither of them said a word, and it was the closest thing to peace they'd had since she came home. When the compressor finally kicked back on, wheezing but alive, gray light was already coming up in the windows. Cole packed his tools. His hands were raw. June watched him tie his apron for the morning shift, double knotted at the front, the way Walt did it, and something old and stubborn in her turned over. "Dell said something," she heard herself say, "that you've been putting your own paychecks back into this place." 2 years. Cole's hand stopped for half a second on the apron strings. Just half. Then finished the knot. "Dell talks too much," he said. And that was all. She let it go. Again, but she didn't forget it this time. She went to see Feeney that week and made him explain the clause, all of it, the real language. The marriage had to be bona fide. That was the word. Real. A good faith marriage. 2 people building a life, not a paper arrangement dressed up for the courthouse. Walt had been specific, Feeney said, almost apologetic, because he'd known Walt and he knew how it sounded. If the marriage was ever challenged and found to be a sham, the whole inheritance collapsed and the building sold. Walt had built the clause like a lock. He didn't want June to marry a stranger to save a building. He wanted her to actually let someone in. He wanted, Feeney said gently, folding his hands, what fathers want. June drove home furious at a dead man and had nowhere to put it. Because here was the arithmetic she couldn't escape. To keep the diner she had to marry, really marry, within the year. It had to be credible, bona fide. It had to survive a challenge from Lorraine and Doyle, who would absolutely challenge it, who were already circling. So it had to be someone tied to the diner. Someone the whole town would believe. Someone who would stand in that kitchen at 2 in the morning to save it. Someone who knew Walt's line, who could keep the place running while she fought the legal war. Who loved it enough to sell the marriage without pretending. There was exactly one person in Rensselaer who fit every line of that. She hated the math. She checked it 3 times and hated it more each time. The recipe card is what finally broke her. It was late, the diner closed, and June was going through her father's things in the office behind the kitchen. Old ledgers, a shoebox of photographs, and in a tin on the shelf, soft with age and dark with grease, a stack of index cards in Walt's handwriting. His recipes, the real ones. The buttermilk pie was on top, the one the whole town swore by, the one Dell had wept a little over when she got it wrong. She couldn't read it. Not really. Walt wrote in his own shorthand, a private code of abbreviations and dashes and little marks that meant something only to him. She could make out flour and buttermilk and a temperature. The rest was hen scratch. Symbols, a whole line at the bottom that wasn't even numbers, that looked almost like a sentence, crossed and recrossed. She turned the card under the light. She'd trained in real kitchens. She'd read 100 recipes, and she could not read her own father's. She was still standing there, the card in her hand, throat tight, when a shadow fell across it. Cole, he'd come back for something, keys, a jacket, and he'd stopped behind her, and he was looking down at the card over her shoulder. She felt him go still. And then, quiet, in that low voice, without being asked, he read it. Not all of it. He read the amounts. The scald first, then the eggs. The mark that meant fold, not whisk. The temperature that was written wrong on purpose, because Walt ran that oven hot. He read her father's private code like it was plain print, because Walt had taught it to him over 9 years at that line, the way a father teaches a son. June turned and looked at him. He was very close. His face was tired and careful, and he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "You can read it," she said. "Some of it. All of it." He didn't answer. He reached past her, slow, and touched the last line, the one that wasn't a recipe, the one that looked like a sentence. His finger hovered over it, and for just a moment something moved across his face, something that looked almost like grief, or guilt, or both. Then he pulled his hand back. "Not that part," he said. "That part's not mine to read." And he took his keys off the hook and left. June stood alone in the closed diner, holding her father's card, looking at a sentence she couldn't read, and understood 2 things at once. That the diner's whole soul was written in a language only Cole Russ could speak, and that she was going to have to ask him. Grant tried one more time first. He came by the diner on a slow afternoon, out of his bank suit, in a sweater, looking earnest and steady and everything her father would have called a catch. He sat at the counter and drank the coffee and made his case gently, the way he did everything. He'd found a way, he said. A private loan, through a friend, nothing on the record, enough to buy her 2 years. And more than that, softer, his hand almost touching hers on the counter. He said maybe it didn't have to be just business. Maybe there was a version of this where she didn't have to fight alone, where she had someone steady beside her. He'd waited a long time, he said. He'd always wondered. And God help her, June almost took it. It would have been so easy. The safe road, laid out flat and smooth. A man her father liked. Money without the mortgage of Cole Rusk's silence. She could marry Grant, satisfy the clause, save the diner, and never once have to stand in a kitchen with the one man who'd made her feel like a stranger in her own home. It was sensible. It was survivable. It was the thing everyone would have told her to do. She looked at Grant's kind, comfortable face, and she thought about it, really thought about it, for a long, quiet minute. Then she thought about 2 in the morning. A man half inside a dead freezer, ruining his hands in the cold, for a diner that wasn't his. She thought about a private code, read aloud over her shoulder without being asked. She thought about a sentence at the bottom of a card that wasn't his to read, and the grief that crossed his face when he touched it. "I can't," she told Grant. "I'm sorry, but I can't." He nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised, and that made her feel worse. He finished his coffee, left his money on the counter even though she waved it off, and told her the offer stayed open, both offers, in a voice that said he knew they wouldn't. Then he left, and the bell rang, and she was alone with the choice she'd already made, without letting herself say it. She made herself say it the next morning. The diner was between rushes, that slack hour, the griddle low, the light coming gold through the front window and lighting up the pie case. Cole was alone on the line, prepping, his back to her, the double knotted apron, the scarred forearms, the whole quiet fortress of him. June came through the swinging door. She had the recipe card in her hand. She'd carried it around for 2 days like it was giving her courage. She crossed the kitchen and set it down on the pass, on the steel between them, gently, like it mattered. Because it did. Cole looked at the card, then at her. He wiped his hands slow on his apron and waited, because he always waited, because he made you say the thing yourself. June's heart was going hard. 12 years of leaving, of pride, of I can do this alone, of I can't stand you, all of it pressing up against the number due in the fall, and the sparrow over the door, and her father's voice she'd never hear again. She took a breath. "Marry me," she said, "for the diner, for Walt. 1 year, and then we're done. And you're free of me. I can't save it alone, and you're the only one who can help me sell it as real." Her voice nearly broke, and she held it. "So, marry me. Please," the griddle ticked. Somewhere out front the old clock hummed. Cole Rusk looked at her across the steel pass, across her father's grease-stained card. And she couldn't read his face at all, couldn't tell if he was about to laugh at her, or walk into the walk-in and shut the door, or say the thing that would break her the rest of the way. For a long, long moment, he said nothing at all. For a long, long moment, he said nothing at all. Then Cole picked up the card. He looked at it, not at her. He set it back down, square to the edge of the steel, the way he squared everything. "Fine," he said. That was all. One word. She'd braced for a speech, for a no, for that quiet cruelty she'd built him up to be. She got one word instead, and somehow it landed harder than any speech could have. "Fine," she said. "You heard me." He turned back to the line, picked up his knife, went back to the onions like nothing at all had happened, like she hadn't just asked him to marry her over her dead father's recipe card. "When? When what? When do we do it? Can't drag it out." Lorraine's got eyes everywhere. June stood there with her heart still hammering and no idea what to do with her hands. "Thursday," she said. "The courthouse opens at 9. We can be back before the lunch rush." "Thursday," Cole said. And that was the whole of it. They married on Thursday. They didn't change. That was the thing she'd remember. He came in at 5 and ran the griddle, and she ran the register. And at 8:30, they hung the back and an hour sign in the window. And they drove to the county courthouse in Cole's truck, with the flowers still on their aprons. Neither of them owned a suit worth the trouble. So they went as they were. A cook and a cook's daughter, in aprons, up the courthouse steps. Dell came. Earl came. They'd insisted, the two of them, the corner booth old-timers, because somebody had to sign the paper, and somebody had to see it done. The fry cook, a kid named Marcus, stood in the back with his cap in his hands. That was the wedding party. 2 regulars and a 19-year-old with grease under his nails. The clerk read it flat, the way you read a lease. Do you take? Do you take? June said I do, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Then it was Cole's turn. And he looked at her. Really looked at her. The first time all morning, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name. I do, he said. He didn't kiss her. The clerk waited, and Dell cleared his throat, and Cole just took her hand and shook it once. Firm, like they'd closed a deal. Which they had. Dell laughed out loud. Earl wiped his eyes and pretended he hadn't. And that was it. Married, they drove back with the windows down and neither of them said a word, and June watched the town roll past and thought, I did it. God help me, I did it. The sign was on. Back in an hour. Cole flipped it to open and tied his apron tighter and went to the line, and June went to the register, and the lunch rush came in like it always did. And nobody out front knew that anything in the world had changed. But it had. Living above the diner with him was the strangest part. The apartment was small. Walt's flannel still hung on the door hook where he'd left it, and neither of them touched it. Cole took the couch. He was scrupulous about it, folding the blanket every morning, gone before she woke. She'd come down at 6, and the coffee would already be poured. Black, no sugar, the way she took it. She never told him how she took it. He just knew. He'd watched her drink it for 2 weeks and filed it away like he filed everything. And now every morning there it was, waiting, still hot. She started to watch him back. He never ate until everyone was fed. She noticed it on the 3rd day. The rush would clear, and the plates would go out, and Cole would still be standing at the line. And only when the last regular had his food would he make himself a plate, standing up, eating fast, one eye on the pass. Walt had done that. She'd forgotten Walt had done that until she saw Cole do it, and something in her chest pulled tight. One night after inventory, she fell asleep in the corner booth. She'd been counting cans since 10, and her head went down on the ledger, and she was gone. She woke at 2:30 with Walt's flannel laid over her shoulders. It smelled like the diner, like her father. Cole was in the kitchen, scrubbing the flat top, and he didn't turn around, and she didn't say anything. And she carried that flannel up the stairs and lay awake a long time. They ran the Friday rush together, and it was the closest thing to flying she'd felt in years. 40 tickets deep, the window full of paper, and they moved around each other in that little kitchen like they'd done it 1,000 times. She called it, he cooked it, she plated, he fired. Not a word wasted. When it was over, they were both soaked through and grinning like fools, and she caught him grinning and he caught her catching him, and he looked away first. You're not bad at this, he said to the griddle. I ran a kitchen in Chicago, she said. I know. Walt told me. Every day. She stopped. He did? Cole scraped the flat top. Every day, he said again, quieter, and wouldn't say more. The pie was the night everything cracked open. It was slow, a Tuesday, rain coming down soft on the neon. She'd pulled the recipe card out again. Walt's buttermilk pie, the one thing on the menu she'd never been able to make right, because the card was in his shorthand, that private chicken scratch he'd never taught her. And the last line ran off into a smear she couldn't read at all. I can't make this, she said. Not to Cole. To the card. To Walt. Cole came and stood behind her. He didn't take the card, he just read it over her shoulder, and his voice came low and even, translating 4 cups buttermilk. Not the low fat. He underlined not twice. A pause. Zest the whole lemon. Bake it low, he means, that squiggles low and slow, hour and 10. He never wrote it down proper because he never measured. It's in his hands. They made it together. Her hands, his reading. He'd call the step and she'd do it, and where the card gave out he'd fill it from memory, from 9 years of standing next to the man. The kitchen filled up with the smell of it. Lemon and butter and burnt sugar at the edges, and it was Walt's kitchen again. It was her whole childhood, and when she pulled it out of the oven she had to stop and press the back of her wrist to her eyes. "Hey," Cole said. "I'm fine." "June?" She turned, and he was close, closer than she'd realized, and the rain was on the glass, and the pie was steaming between them, and neither of them moved. His eyes went to her mouth, hers to his. 1 inch, half an inch. She could feel the heat coming off him, off the oven, off the whole aching room. Then he stepped back, wiped his hands on his apron. "Cut it while it's warm," he said rough. "Buttermilk pie's no good cold." And he went out front and started stacking chairs that were already stacked. And June stood there, with her heart slamming, and told herself, hard, "It isn't real. It isn't real." Remember, it isn't real. She almost believed it. The papers came on a Wednesday. A courier of all things in a town where everybody walked. He handed the envelope across the counter and Dell signed for it because June's hands were full. And June opened it standing right there in the middle of the breakfast rush, and the world tilted. A challenge to the will. Filed by Lorraine Halloran Price, co-executor, and Kessler Vane Holdings, interested party. The marriage of June Halloran and Cole Rusk was, quote, "a marriage of convenience entered solely to defeat the conditions of the estate, not a bona fide union, and they were asking the probate court to set it aside and order the sale." And there, stapled to the back, a motion to subpoena the bank records. Both of them. All of it. June looked up and Lorraine was standing in the doorway. She'd come to watch, apparently. She had her handbag over her arm, and her coat buttoned, and Doyle behind her with that soft, patient smile. And she said, loud enough for the corner booth to hear, "You should have taken the money, June. Now everyone gets to see what you really are." "Get out of my diner," June said. "It isn't yours yet," Lorraine said. "That's rather the point." They went. And the diner, which had been loud, went quiet, 40 regulars pretending very hard to look at their eggs. The records came back a week later, and they told a story June wasn't ready to hear. She was in the office behind the kitchen when she found it, going through the statements the lawyer had forwarded, looking for anything to fight with. And there it was, month after month, 2 years back. A payment against the diner's lien. Not from the diner's account, from a personal account. C. Rusk. Every month. His whole paycheck, near enough. For 2 years. Dell's words at the counter came back to her like a slap. Cole's been putting his own paychecks back into this dump for 2 years and won't say why. She'd heard it and let it go past. Now she was holding the proof in both hands. And underneath it, in the lawyer's careful summary, the rest. A note in the estate file. Walt Halloran, in his last week, had asked his lawyer to record a wish that could not be made a condition. Only a hope that Cole Rusk look after his daughter and the place, both, if she came home. June sat with the paper a long time. The griddle ran out front. She could hear him out there. Cole, feeding the town, and every plate he sent out he'd been paying for out of his own pocket for 2 years. And her father had asked him to look after her like she was a stray to be minded. And the marriage? The one word. Fine. The coffee poured black and hot every morning. All of it. All of it was duty. Obligation, a dying man's request, and a mortgage he'd already half bought. Not her. Never her. She should have felt grateful. She felt like she'd been made small. She went out to the line. She waited for the ticket window to clear. Then she put the papers on the pass, on the steel, the same place she'd put the recipe card, and she said, "You've been paying the lien." Cole went still. 2 years, she said. "Your whole check. And Walt asked you to look after me. It's all here. All of it." "June, was that the deal?" Her voice was shaking, and she hated it. "He asks you on his deathbed to mind the daughter and the diner, and here I come with a will I can't beat alone. And you've already got money sunk in the place you'll lose if I lose. So of course you say fine. Of course you do. It was never a favor. It was you protecting your investment and keeping a promise to a dead man. That's not don't. She was crying now and furious at herself for it. I will not be somebody's obligation. I did that my whole life with him. I came home to bury him, and I find out he arranged me a keeper. Take your money, Cole. When this is over, you'll get every dollar back with interest. I don't care if I have to sell my own blood. Take it and go. He stood there with the flat top smoking behind him and his jaw working and all the words he could never say jammed up behind his teeth. And for once, she wanted him to fight, to say it isn't what you think, to just talk. He said okay, and she went up the stairs and packed a bag and moved into the room over the hardware store. And the frost came that night, the first real frost, silver on every window on Main Street. And she lay in a stranger's bed and told herself she'd done the sensible thing. The hearing was set for a Friday. It should have been at the courthouse. But the courthouse was being repainted, some water thing in the ceiling, and the judge, a heavy-set man named Pruitt, who'd eaten at Walt's counter for 30 years, said he saw no reason they couldn't hold a probate matter in a place that was itself the matter. And so the hearing came to the diner. They pushed the tables to the walls. The regulars came anyway, every last one, because you couldn't have kept them out with a court order. 40 of them lined up along the counter and jammed in the booths. Dell and Earl in the corner, Marcus by the kitchen door, Doyle in a chair up front in a suit that cost more than the register held on a good week, Lorraine beside him, gloves on, Grant Weller by the door, hat in his hands, because the bank had an interest too, and because June thought he wanted to see how it ended. Cole stood at the pass. He hadn't taken his apron off. He'd cooked the breakfast rush like it was any Friday, and then washed his hands and stood there. And he wouldn't look at her, and she wouldn't look at him. And the whole room could feel the crack running between them. Judge Pruitt sat in a booth with the file open on the Formica. "This isn't a courtroom," he said, "so we'll keep it plain. Mr. Doyle, you and Mrs. Price say this marriage is a sham. Say your piece." Doyle stood. He buttoned his jacket. He had a way of talking like he was doing you a kindness by talking at all. "Your Honor, the facts are simple, and frankly, a little sad. Ms. Halloran inherited a failing business shackled to a debt she cannot pay. $137,000 comes due in the fall. She had one condition to satisfy to keep the property, marriage, and, lo and behold, 11 days after the will was read, she marries the line cook. A man she is on record, in front of witnesses in this very room, as saying she could not stand." He spread his hands. "The bank records show Mr. Rusk has been quietly paying down the lien for 2 years. He has a financial stake. She has a deadline. This isn't a marriage. It's a merger, dressed up in aprons, to keep $410,000 out of the estate and out of my client's hands. Set it aside. Order the sale. Let these people get on with their lives." He smiled at June, that soft smile. "I've kept the offer open. Sentiment doesn't service debt, Ms. Halloran. It never did." He sat. Lorraine reached over and patted his sleeve. "Mrs. Price," the judge said, "your co-executor. You want to add anything?" Lorraine rose halfway out of her chair. "Only that I loved my brother," she said, "and he wasn't in his right mind at the end, chaining that girl to this building. I'm trying to do right by his memory. That diner is worth more as a lot than it ever was, as a—" she waved a gloved hand at the room, at the neon, at 40 faces, as this. "That's not cruelty. That's arithmetic." Dell, in the corner, said, loud, "You've eaten 40 years of Walt's arithmetic, Lorraine." "That'll do," Pruitt said, "but not hard." He turned. "June, you want to speak?" June stood. She'd rehearsed something in the room over the hardware store, and now every word of it was gone. She looked at the counter she'd learned to walk behind. She looked at Dell and Earl. She did not look at Cole. I married him for the diner, she said, because it was true, and because she was done lying, even to save it. I asked him, and he said yes, and we did it at the courthouse in our aprons, and I thought, her voice caught. I thought that made it a sham. Maybe it does. I don't know what I thought love was supposed to look like. But I know what this place is. It's the only room in this town where nobody eats alone. My father built that. I came home to save it, and if the only way to save it was a piece of paper, then fine, I'll wear that. Sell it if you have to. But don't you dare tell me it isn't real, the thing that happens in here, because I've watched it happen every morning of my life. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. The room was dead quiet, and then Cole spoke. Your Honor. Everyone turned. He hadn't been asked. He was standing at the pass with his hands flat on the steel, and his voice was rough and low, and it carried anyway, carried to every corner, because he almost never used it, and when he did, people listened. I got something to say, and I'm only going to say it the once. So, Pruitt nodded. He's right about the money. Cole's chin went at Doyle. I paid the lien 2 years. My check. All of it. He makes it sound like a scheme. It wasn't a scheme. I did it because this place is the only home I ever had, and Walt Halloran was the only father I ever got, and when I found out he was carrying that balloon and it was going to swallow the diner whole, I put my money on it because I couldn't stand to watch it go under. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't want thanks. I wanted the doors open. He swallowed. And yeah, at the end, he asked me. Said, look after her. Look after the place, if she comes home. I said I would. Doyle was smiling still, but it had gone thin at the edges. So when she came in that kitchen and asked me to marry her for the diner, Cole said, you'd think that's why I said yes. To keep my promise. To protect what I'd sunk in. That's what she thinks. She moved out over it. Thinks I married her out of duty to a dead man. He shook his head, slow. That's the part I gotta fix. He looked at June then, full on, across the whole crowded room, and June felt it go through her like a current. I didn't marry you for Walt, he said. I'd have paid that lien whether you came home or not. I'd have gone down with the place. That was for him. Marrying you, his jaw worked, that was the one thing in 9 years I ever did for me. I said yes so fast because I'd been saying it in my head for about 2 years and never had the nerve. I let you think I was a stone. Easier than saying it and watching you not want it. I'm no good with words. Walt knew that. That's why he stopped. He reached into his apron and took out the recipe card. The grease-stained one, buttermilk pie, with the last line she'd never been able to read. You could never read his shorthand, Cole said to her. You thought the last line was part of the recipe. It's not. He wrote it after he got sick. It's not a recipe, June. It's for you. The room held its breath. Cole read it. His finger under the words, his voice cracking down the middle of it. For my June. When you finally make this right, it means you came home for good. The pie was never the secret. The secret is, you don't do it alone. Let the man help. He's better than he lets you see. Dad, the card shook in his hand. He set it down on the pass, careful, square to the edge. He knew, Cole said. Put the clause in so you'd have to stop running long enough to find out. Old man played us both. But he wasn't wrong. For a moment, nobody in the diner breathed. Then Earl, in the corner, said, thick. That's Walt. That's Walt right there. And had to look at the ceiling. Judge Pruitt closed the file. I've known this diner 30 years, he said. I know a bona fide anything when I see it, and I've watched these two run a Friday rush. He looked over the top of his glasses at Doyle. The test isn't whether the timing's convenient, counselor. It's whether the marriage is real. I've got a kitchen full of witnesses who've watched them work that line side by side. A recipe card that reads like a father who saw it coming. And 2 people too proud to admit the thing everyone in this room can see. The marriage stands. The conditions satisfied. The estate passes to June Halloran. Diner and building both. He rapped his knuckles on the formica. That's my gavel. Somebody pour me a coffee. The room came apart. 40 regulars up out of the booths at once. A roar of it, Dell pounding the counter, Marcus whooping by the kitchen door. Doyle sat very still in the middle of the noise. He reached into his jacket and took out his pen, the fat, expensive one, and clicked it closed and put it away. His check still lay on the counter where it had lain for weeks, uncashed, curling at the corner. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. "You're making a mistake," he said to no one, to the room, and no one heard him, and he stood and worked his way to the door. "Table for one, mister?" "Doyle?" Dell called after him. "On the house." Doyle didn't answer. The bell over the door rang him out. Lorraine took longer. She buttoned her coat one button at a time under 40 pairs of eyes that had known her since she was a girl. And not one of them said a kind word. And not one of them said a cruel one either, which was worse. Dell just watched her. Earl just watched her. She got to the door and stopped, like she might say something, some last piece of arithmetic. Then she saw the framed photo of Walt over the register, the one June had hung the first week, and whatever she'd meant to say, she didn't. The bell rang. She was gone. Grant Weller was still by the door. He put his hat on. When June looked at him, he gave her a nod. Small, rueful. A man conceding a hand he'd known he'd lose. "He's the right one," Grant said. "For what it's worth. I could have told you that the day you came home." And he tipped his hat and went out into the cold, the safe road, untaken. And June found she felt nothing but a clean and simple gratitude that he'd been kind about it. Then the room was hers. The regulars, the noise, the neon, the whole warm arc of it. And Cole, at the pass, still with his hands flat on the steel, waiting. Because he always waited. Because he made you say the thing yourself. June crossed the room. It took 100 years. The regulars went quiet again, watching, the whole town leaning in. She stopped in front of him, the steel pass between them, her father's card between them, the way it had been the day she'd asked. She'd asked him for one word that day, and gotten it. Now it was her turn. "Stay," she said. One word. His to keep or break. Cole Rusk wiped his hands on his apron. Slow, careful, both of them, the way he did everything. Then he reached across the steel and took her hands in his scarred ones, and he held them. And that was the kiss. That was the whole of it. The hands doing what the mouth never could. The diner came down around them like a wave. Dell was on his feet. Earl was crying openly now and not caring who saw. Somebody put a quarter in the old jukebox, and something with horns came up, and June laughed into Cole's shoulder. Laughed and cried both, and above the door the Sparrow neon buzzed pink and gold like it had buzzed her whole childhood, like it would buzz long after. "Fine," Cole said into her hair. His one word, given back to her, turned all the way over into what it had always meant. Spring came to Rensselaer slow, the way it always did. Mud first and then, one morning, everything green. The diner was full. It was always full now, but that Friday it was fuller. Because it was the reopening, the grand one, the banner June had strung across the front window in her own hand. The lien was gone. Cleared, paid off. The deed in a frame on the office wall with June Halloran's name on it and nobody else's. The balloon that was going to swallow the place had come due in the fall, and the town had filled the diner every night until it was paid, and the fall had passed, and the winter, and here was the spring. June ran the line now. Cole ran it beside her. They cooked the reopening side by side, 40 tickets deep and climbing, the window full of paper, moving around each other in that little kitchen like they'd done it 1,000 years. She called it. He cooked it. He fired. She plated. Not a word wasted. The grill hissed. The pie steamed in the case, buttermilk, 3 of them, gone by noon. Over the pass where anybody at the counter could see it, hung a frame. 2 cards in it, side by side. Waltz. Grease-stained. The shorthand, and the last line that wasn't a recipe. And beside it a second card. Clean, new in June's own square hand. She'd written out the buttermilk pie at last. All of it, measured proper, every step, so the next person wouldn't have to guess. And under the recipe, in her own words, she'd added a line of her own. You don't do it alone. He was right. Jay. Marcus was fry cook still, but they'd hired 2 more, a girl named Tansy on register and a kid named Bo on prep, because the place was busy enough to need them now. Del and Earl held the corner booth like it was deeded to them, which, June sometimes thought, it may as well have been. There was a stool at the end of the counter nobody sat on. It had been Lorraine's, 40 years, before all this. It sat empty, and June left it empty. Not out of spite, just because some things you leave be. A postcard had come at Christmas, from Florida, no return address, 3 lines, cool and correct. June had read it twice and put it in the drawer with the ledgers, and not answered. That was arithmetic too. And once, in the winter, a long dark car had slowed on Main Street outside the front window, idled a moment, the man in the back seat looking out at the neon, and the full booths, and the steam on the glass. June had looked back at him through the window and lifted the coffee pot, an offer, an old joke. Table for 1? The car had pulled away. It didn't come back. Some men can't stand to watch a place stay alive that they meant to bury. Now it was spring, and the reopening, and the whole town packed in shoulder to shoulder. Cole plated the last of the rush, and only when the last regular had his food in front of him, made himself a plate, and stood at the line and ate it standing up, one eye on the pass. June came and stood next to him and stole a bite off it, and he let her and didn't say a word, which from Cole was a whole speech. Walt would have hated all this fuss, she said. Walt would have loved it, Cole said. He'd have complained the whole time. Same thing with him. She laughed. Out front the Sparrow buzzed pink and gold over the open door, and the door kept opening, and nobody ate alone. A legacy isn't a building. It isn't a clause in a will or a check on a counter or a number due in the fall. It's the recipe you finally write down so the next hand can read it. It's who's standing next to you at the line when the window fills up. Her father had known that. He'd built a whole diner around it, and when he couldn't say it to her plain, he'd hidden it in a pie and a clause and a quiet man's 2 years of paychecks, and trusted her to come home and find it. She found it. She'd married the cook, and it turned out to be the truest thing she ever did. If your family ever had a place like Walt's, a diner, a counter, a corner where the whole town came to eat and argue and grieve and live, do me a kindness and comment the name of your town. I want to see just how far this story travels.